Yes.
Welcome everybody over here. I'm just getting.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi Preis.
Yes, thank you. Oh, the last Parsha class of the year. Want to be Parsha related,
That's right.
But actually, I this afternoon I was giving a class at noon and had inspiration on a verse that we'll be reading on Shabbos. So it'll be in the Torah reading for Rosh Hashanah. So kind of like the Parsha, and a gem that Hashem tossed my way while I was giving that class. An idea popped into my head. So I'll share that as well, even though it's not exactly what I wanted to focus on tonight, but just for 3 minutes. In the laning, in the Torah reading, we're talking about the birth of Yitzchak, of Isaac, and we will mention, of course, Hashem's remembering Sarah, giving her this pregnancy, which was miraculous, her birthing Yitzchak. And then it talks about the fact that when Yitzchak was weaned, simple reading of the text, Vayigamel Yitzchak, at that moment, or at that time, Abraham made a party. He makes a mishta, makes a celebration of his son being weaned. And as I was looking at that verse today, it was a little surprising because I don't remember being at any weaning parties. And it's not part of our Jewish culture. It didn't live on as an obligation, even though many do find a hint in that verse to the idea of a seuda for the bris. But the simple meaning of the text is that it's something about the weaning, that he's no longer nursing. And why, of all people, is Abraham the only one ever recorded making a celebration about this? And why does that have to be recorded? Why do we know about it if it's just something he did, his personal decision that's not of Torah import for us? We don't know what brand baby food he gave Yitzchak at that juncture, so why do we need to know he made a party? And the following thought kind of popped in this afternoon. I want to share it because I think it is potentially very significant. To Abraham,
20 minutes.
Pre that being weaned, nursing is fundamentally a different stage of life than post-nursing, not only because of the health of the baby or needs of the baby. Vayigamel, that juncture of being weaned, Vayigamel could almost be translated as turning him into a camel. A gamal is a camel. And it's the stage at which Yitzchak is becoming a camel. Now, he didn't become a camel. What does it mean, Vayigamel, camel-like? Why do we call acts of kindness, gemilas chasadim, built on the exact same root of gomel, of being camel-like? Because the goal in doing acts of kindness is to help somebody get off and go on their own and not need to keep turning back to you every moment. If you just provide them by creating a dependency, and without getting involved in any discussion on the political spectrum right now, but you're not doing an act of pure chesed if you are creating a dependent class or dependent personality. And the camel represents this notion that drinks and then goes off on its own for the long distance. And of course, ultimately needs to find water again, but there's that kind of symbol of being able to manage relatively independently for a long block of time. And that's the transition from nursing to being weaned, is you're like that gamal, that you're off on your own. Now the child is not really on his own, probably not earning his keep at that stage of life, but shifting from being absolutely dependent to having some level of independence and certainly a potential for great independence. While in the nursing state, there's no room for independence. There's nothing I can do to provide myself that dinner. But when I am post that state, and even a very young baby, a toddler, will already learn how to unwrap the food or pull out move the food across the table or lift the spoon to his face. So it's a fundamental difference. And to an Abraham, who is the ultimate paradigm of kindness, kindness is giving and not taking. Being in a state of life when you can only take that's not yet living, because living is giving. Becoming great is having the capacity to give to others. So at the juncture where his baby son shifts from being a pure taker to having some level of independence, and again, it's minor at that stage, but it gives the potential. The child starts feeling independent. No, I'll do it. They can't do it, but I'm going to do it at this juncture, and I'm going to take charge. So giving him that sense of independence and some relative independence is a phenomenal distinction from that earlier stage, and it's now the potential to start being a giver. You can't be a giver while you are absolutely dependent. Becoming a giver is dependent on being independent, and that's that juncture of that Vayigamel. So that's a thought that came away, which I wanted to share. But now on to the primary topic, as we look at Rosh Hashanah and the liturgy of Rosh Hashanah and the message of Rosh Hashanah. We are, in the words of my Rosh Hashiva of blessed memory, Rabbi Weinberg, that's how we are handicapped. We are handicapped because the liturgy is meant to draw us into the state of trepidation over what it means to stand in front of our King. And we cannot begin to relate to the concept of a king. I mean, we can picture a king, but to us, a king is just, typically a person with, velvet robes and a crown on his head. And if we're blessed to be living in a society where we have the capacity to make cartoons about the most powerful person in our governmental system, and whether it's not promoting we should make cartoons or derogatory cartoons, but you will not be arrested for that, because we have no sense of what it means to have reverence or awe for a king. So that when the Shliach Tzibur, when the Chazan is going to get up there and start saying Hamelech, which in days of old would be having people shake at the word Melech. And we're going to substitute the word Melech in at many junctures of our prayer and declare the Simul Chata and describe God as the monarch and Avinu Malkeinu. We really miss a lot of the effect that it was meant to generate, and therefore a lot of the internal tools that would have been triggered to have the right mindset to use the day correctly. And to give a little perspective on this, I came across just about 2 or 3 days ago, Rabbi Meir Chadash, one of the great rabbis of Israel of the past generation, described that he, as a child, had been present when one of the czars, probably the last czar, was being coronated. He was not present, meaning at the scene, but he was privy to this. And he was privy to this because there had been a section, it sounds like the equivalent of when they have like a large state fair, like you create a mini city. Like they created the equivalent of a small city for the coronation. And to get into that city, like getting into that fair, required a ticket. And if you got a ticket to get into that zone where the coronation was happening, not to get into the inner circle or anywhere close that you can even see, but just to be inside the gates, you were seen by the rest of your peers in your community as the elite. And if a member of your family had such a ticket, then you were held in high regard. And that was just a ticket to get into the territory in which the coronation was happening. And if you were one of the people who was on that inner circle that could see, I mean, we're talking, we didn't have the modern technology to see this at a distance, but if you could actually see this with your own eyes, then you were almost idolized, that you were given that right to be witness to the coronation of the equivalent of the emperor. It's a big deal if someone gets invited to inauguration, but you're not going to be like bowing to the person and enamored with the fact that, okay, it's pretty cool. We don't have that sense of that awe. And even in our world today, where we don't have the equivalents of even that czar or that scene, our kind of the most famous monarchy of our world would perhaps be the monarchy of Great Britain. And, we think of that as, kind of a joke, but I'll share that. Actually, some of you may have heard this because it was shared once here in Cincinnati. Gary Torgo, one of the big leaders of the Jewish community in Detroit, president of the Beis Yehuda School for many, many years, he was at an event with Mrs. Thatcher, Margaret Thatcher, and he's had dialogue with her multiple times, but she shared the following with him. She shared that she at that time had fairly recently before that been at an event together with the Queen. And she did the most devastating thing that apparently a woman can do when going to any event is to show up wearing the same dress as the hostess For some reason, I wore the same shirt, I think it was Rabbi Alt one day, and nobody seemed to mind. But she showed up, and she was wearing the same dress as the queen. And like, there was no way to dig a hole deep enough, fast enough. The dread of knowing I wore the same dress, how unthoughtful of me to try to coordinate. And she actually sent a apology to Her Highness's office for apologizing for not in advance having tried to determine what in effect would the queen be wearing, so that she should not make that mistake of wearing the same dress. And she gets back the following letter. No worries. Her Highness pays no attention to that which is worn by commoners. Now, that's the Queen of England, who again is almost just simply an honorific title, but there is a real sense that we're distinct from the masses. We're something else. And a king was in many ways distinct from the world around him. In the Torah system, the king is anointed with shemen, with oil. Oil represents always breaking above the nature. Oil doesn't mix with water. It always separates up, not to the right or to the left, but up on top. And the king is told, you are above the society, now attached to that society, not aloof and distant, but there's a degree of your being above and then using your job to pull the others up. But we really have a hard time relating to any of this in our world of what is a monarchy, and therefore we're handicapped. And therefore it's significant in these last hours, less than 24 hours till we'll be actually in Rosh Hashanah mode, to be trying to conjure up in our mind what it means when we say God is Malkeinu. What does it mean, Melech? And just to think of terms like majesty and glory and grandeur and power, and to try to develop internally, to visualize what it would have meant in the world where the king really has all power and the life and death is in his hands. And to know there are writings about people who started hyperventilating or passed out because the king was passing on the road, and his entourage passed because you couldn't bear to just be in kind of normal breathing mode. And to again, not any of the negative or like dread in the sense of I can't handle this, but to recognize that we have to can reignite within ourselves some of those tolls, some of those emotions, so we can utilize the liturgy properly and be in the right mindset. If we do that, it has another effect, a very positive effect, not only in terms of using the liturgy better, but in terms of better appreciating ourselves and our potential. That same story of the Rabbi Chodesh describing as a child knowing about the coronation, he takes that story and says the following. He says, so if you were in the inner circle, you were a big, big deal. What about if you were the one who was assigned to place the crown on the head of the king? And then you were just like in a different league. You were viewed as like a different being than the rest of us. That you were given that right, that authority, that power. It's as if you were triggering the shift from this person being the individual to being actually that emperor. And that, he says, we have been given the right to do, and the responsibility to do, and the privilege to do every Rosh Hashanah. Because Rosh Hashanah, we are tasked with coronating God as the king. We are tasked with triggering a shift in how much God is viewed by the rest of the world as a king. That's what we're praying for. We're praying. The classic liturgy of Rosh Hashanah has almost nothing to do with repentance, and much, much more to do with begging God to be more vivid in the world, asking God to be more manifest in the world. And that is the vehicle of God's being made king. The shofar blast, one of the key elements of the shofar blast, is the coronation of the king. One of the key elements of the tashlich, being by the water source, is because kings were often coronated by running water, by a spring of water, indicating life and vitality and continuity. The themes of Rosh Hashanah are the themes of monarchy that are in our hands. We are doing it. We are the ones who are tasked with coronating God. So if we're tasked with coronating the king, we're like that one who's assigned to place the crown. Who are we? We don't just have a ticket to get in. We're over there on the stage putting that crown on. And if we can declare Avinu Malkeinu, well, if the king is our father, then who are we? So not only are we the ones assigned with the coronating, we are the sons of the king. We are B'nai Melachim, which actually has halachic ramifications in very ways we'll get into right now, of the fact that we treat ourselves, we're meant to treat ourselves as sons of that king. And as such, when we look at how we're looking towards the future year, and we're trying to kind of give ourselves that booster of inspiration to get our act together and correct the things we did wrong and avoid the negative and try to start shifting toward the positive and take on more mitzvahs and take on more dedication to detail in mitzvahs. Well, if we're part of that inner circle and our job is to be coronating the king and we are the sons of the king, it's beneath us, pasnisht, as they would say. It's beneath us to be acting as mere commoners. Nothing is common. We should be uncommon. We should be excellent. And we should be striving for the extraordinary. So as we look towards Rosh Hashanah and as we then start incorporating references to the Melech over and over again, and Avinu Malkeinu, okay, not necessarily using that phrase as much this year since we'll have a Shabbos, but still putting it into our phraseology and having the simloch, and especially look carefully and, pause and ponder as reading the Amida expressions about what we're asking to happen and who are we to be asking that to happen, and what it means to be, in a sense, really gifted with the authority to be what would otherwise be audacity, to be playing that role of asking to happen. But no, that is primary, and that's what the nature of the day is. So hopefully with those ideas in mind, we can better appreciate, better utilize, better have a sense of the self and what our goals can then be, and all merit a year in which God's kingdom is much more recognized, and the world gets it, and at the same time provided with all of the remedies for all that ails and that keeps us distant and having to Zoom rather than connect in a more intimate manner. And a year of lots of good things, including lots of opportunity for shared Torah study. Shana Tova. And thank you, Ray Alt, for always coordinating, and should be a good, successful year for you. I think everybody is still muted.
Shana Tova. Paul.
Oh yeah, Shana Tova to you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Catch up on these
Thank
chat
you.
messages that were sent in.
Shana Tova, Rabbi.
Shana Tova, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Rabbi Alt. Hello, Rabbi Alt.